All right, we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited to be here to talk about what's new in policy and compliance and the new store release. And I'm also very excited to be joined by Dharav and Anushri, our two product managers. So welcome. I
Thank
want
you,
to
Terry.
got got a couple of things for housekeeping here before we really leap into this. You will be automatically placed on mute. You are. But please use the Q&A. We want to make this interactive. We want you guys to ask questions. We want to make sure you get your questions answered. So use the Q&A panel, the Q&A drop down for that. That way, if we don't get to your questions for some reason, we'll actually be able to get to you because we'll be able to keep track of them. The session will be recorded, and I will put in the chat a link to our YouTube channel, our YouTube playlist. And then when the session ends, you might be getting a survey. If you do have time, if you could take that, that'd be awesome. We do appreciate the feedback. So with that, very excited. We have released new enhancements on the ServiceNow store for policy and compliance. Very excited about that. We've had a series of webinars that we're talking about these enhancements. The first one was back on February 7th. So if you haven't seen that, you can still catch it on demand on the playlist. It's a brand new user interface. Very exciting. The next one we had was on the 9th, and that's around our risk management application. You don't want to miss finding out about risk appetite. That is super, super exciting and cool. Things that you don't want to not know about, in addition to our AI that we're using to categorize risk. And then we also, as part of the risk management application, we use a couple of our common core things like issue data modeling and common controls. We didn't talk about those in the risk management application demo because we saved them for now. So today, as part of policy and compliance, we're going to go through common control inheritance. We're going to go through the issue management inheritance and enhancements. That's also applicable to risk management. So know that it's not just policy compliance. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dharav to walk us through some of these very cool enhancements. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thank you, Teresa. Thanks for inviting to this call. Super excited. Thanks, everyone, for joining from around the world. I see we have good participation today. And I'm going to walk you through our common controls feature as well as the other feature, which is issues. It's a Power Pack session. We just have 1 hour, so I'm going to squeeze right into it. Let's get started with the common controls. So I hope you see the standard control screen, right? Just want to start it.
It's a blank screen right now.
Super. Yeah, that's
you're gonna build it out.
Super. So before getting into common controls, let's talk about what and why. Why do we need common controls, or what exactly is common controls all about? So for that, I have standard controls, which I'm going to showcase. So the controls that we have today is what we call it as standard controls, the way they are today. We have control objective. You go ahead and link entity type to it in general, where there are a couple of entities that you have linked to it, and it goes and it generates controls. I'm sure every one of us on this call are familiar with this system of control, which is there as of today. So that's how we have it today. Now, there have been cases where there is the control, which is the same control, which is being repeated multiple times, just because of the nature of the control. So for example, single sign-on as one control, right? It is being used by multiple applications, but then in the system with ServiceNow, you have to create multiple controls for each entity, which is each application that would be using the control. That way, there are many such examples where you might end up with a lot of controls. Now, the control has a life cycle, which is end-to-end, which is tedious to manage if you have to do it repetitive time. There's attestation of the controls that we need to do. There's also the entire cycle of maintaining, monitoring, testing it, the issues generated out of it. All of them becomes too repetitive in certain case when the control is common in nature. And that's how common controls came into picture. So in common control, what we are saying is you have a common control, which is just a regular control. You tag it as common. We'll see in demo how we tag it. and you mark it as common, which converts the control as common. And you have the entity, which is actually implementing it. So I have, let's take an example of facilities department. You have a facility department and you have a common control, which is access control. So the swipe card access is being managed by access control by the facilities. But all the departments residing in there, all of them comply to this. So instead of duplicating the control for each of them, what we are saying is we introducing a concept of reliant entities. Reliant entities meaning all these departments which are in that facility will rely on my common control. In this case, the access control, which we have. So we link it directly to common control. Now that's a change. That's something new that we introduced in this release. Not just that, you may not want to go and add reliant entities one by one and keep going with that. So we also have reliant entity types, where you link the entire entity type to the common control, and all the entities, which are in this case entity 1 to 4, will also auto-populate in your reliant entities. So they are relying on it, and they are taking the advantage of being tested once applied to many of them, kind of inheritance that we have. Let's go ahead and look at one of the examples. So what we're saying here is you have an entity which manages your common control, and that's your main entity. We could call it primary entity conceptually, but that's the one which is implementing it. That's the one which is testing it. And that's where all the fun happens. All the other entities are just reliant and relying and consuming that. So you test once, even your control testing, your indicators, attestation, everything has to be just once on my common control. Not just that, there's also scoring. So once the common control is compliant, obviously I want to leverage that compliance score. So I go ahead and update my each individual entities which are relying on it. The score gets updated based on the status of my common control. So in this case, all the reliant entities are getting updated because this is compliant. Again, yes, the individual entities can have their standard controls too, but on top of it, it can have the common control.
So that actually saves a lot of time, right?
Oh yeah,
I mean, because you're only testing. You're testing now. It's a true test once, and relate or comply with many.
Yes. So we'll just take a quick second example before jumping on this actual demo. So we have fire sprinkler system where we are saying all of these are my reliant departments. They are relying on these, but this is being managed by my entity, which is facilities. So that's going to manage it and that's going to test it. We'll also see that this common control can also be linked to multiple risks, because if I have all this as reliant entities, they might also have individual risk, because today we don't have common risk. It's just individual risk that you have as is. But you can leverage the power of linking those individual risks to my common control. So all of these risks are also mitigated by one single control rather than having an individual control for them. Again, that's part of the common control package that we have. We'll quickly understand on how the scoring works. Just one more slide before jumping into the demo. I know you guys are excited about. So here, what we are saying is I have one reliant entity which has 5, or just an entity, not a reliant, let's say it's an entity, which has 5 different controls. Out of the 5 controls, the control 2 and control 3 are tagged as common. So irrespective of standard or common control, our scoring continues to work the way it used to work. So how scoring works is if my control is active, meaning if it is not retired or if the status is not applicable, then it is considered for scoring. So in this case, only the first 3 will be considered for scoring, and 2 out of 3. So I have total 3 active controls, of which the first and second is compliant. So the score works as 2 by 3, which is 67% in percentage, and hence my reliant entity score becomes 67. This is in case of non-weighted ones. You can also activate the weighing of scores, and we also have that in the next slide. So if it's weighted average score that we have, it still works the same formula. It's kind of a similar formula where not applicable is not considered or retired is not considered, but only the active ones get considered. However, in this case, instead of the direct average, we take the weights. So the weight of compliance is summed together, which is 10 plus 10, and divided by the weight of everything, which is the total as 40. So 20 by 40, which turns out to be 50%, and that adds up as a 50% Reliant Entity score. Now that's at high level for what our common controls is all about. We'll jump right into the demo.
So I've got a couple questions. Now, two of the questions, so I want to make sure that you cover these in your demo, because I know you will. But they want to know how they can turn the sea of controls they currently have into Reliant controls. So if you can make sure you show that, and I know you're going to. And the same question for entities versus Reliant entity types. So make sure when you're doing your demo, I know you're going to do that, make sure you show that. And then the third question is, even if we consider control, I think it's back to your example, control 3 as a key control, the compliant level will be higher in the calculation. So maybe if you can go back a slide, I think the question was.
Sure. Was it for the weighted one?
Even if we consider control 3 as a key control, the compliant level will still be higher in the calculation.
So the compliance score, irrespective of it being key control or not, it depends on weighted. In this example, I'm taking the weight of the control. Now the weight can be defined by the user. By default, it's the weight 10, but in this case, we have changed it to weight 20 just to showcase the power of it. And this is the same that works for regular controls or common controls. The only enhancement that is the way the regular controls scoring works. Common control is added as one of the factors into it with the same scoring base. So irrespective of it being a key control, in weighted controls, it depends on the actual weight of it, which will be used in the calculation.
So what is a key control? I think people are having a little trouble with what a key control is.
Yes, so key control is you have a flag on the control to mark it as key control, which is used for reporting purpose and differently, but it would not impact your scoring. So it's just a flag used for reporting purpose to report certain controls as key controls.
Got it. So when you go through the demo, I think people really want to try to understand this whole common control entity, and how to make sure you change it from a regular control to a common control. And yes. So I know you're going to show that, but make sure that you slow down when you're going through that. So you're probably going to get a lot of questions there.
Okay. Yep. We can do that. Sure. So let me jump to the demo right away.
Lots of great. Keep the questions coming. Lots of great questions. We really love this, making it interactive.
Yeah. So once I log into my compliance workspace, again, just to highlight, the common controls and the issue feature, both of them are exclusively available in the new UI. So it's available in Workspace. If you are still on the classic UI, we are doing all the investments to the new UI, the Workspace. So we recommend users to use Workspace for this. So getting it started, what we have is, in this, I can go ahead and go to my regular control. So I just have my list saved here. If someone is not aware about the workspace, you could go into the list view, and from list view, you could see all the lists that you have available on the instance. It's still loading up. We'll refresh in a minute. And once it loads up, you get a library of this sequence. So I have added my list, which is easy, handy way of favorites. And what I've done is I can see all my active controls over here. So in this list of control, you would see now we have a new column called function. The function is where we will identify, is it a standard control or is it a common control? So this is the new column that we've added. In this, let me go ahead and open one of the regular control that we have. So this is my standard control that I have. Let me just go to a different one, which is in draft status. So moving a control from a standard to a common control, or tagging a common control to a standard, can happen when you are in specific states. So right now, what we are looking at is you need to be in a state which is draft. So I'm opening a control which is in draft state. And on the ellipses that I have on the right here is where I would see convert to common. So if you see, this is my regular related list which are there. The moment I go ahead and convert it to common, okay, in this case, there was no objective. Let me add one. So this works for all your existing controls as well, where you could just go ahead and save this, where you could just go ahead and you will now see the new option of converting your control into a common control. So I would go ahead and it will confirm, do you really want to convert it to common? It will allow you to add Reliant entities. I say okay, and my page will refresh. Now you can see there are two new related lists that I could see. One is Reliant entities and the other one is entity types. So when I say a common control with its entity, it's still the same entity which was applying. In this case, it was Acme, and I just see this two as Reliant list. Let's start with the Reliant entities first. So I'll also take a better example of a real life scenario. So that's how you convert into common. I have certain controls which are already converted to common. So I'm saying I have a control which is monitor employee internet usage. Now that's across my organization, across different location. I don't want them to go to storage websites so they could upload some confidential details, things like that. So I'm monitoring my employee internet usage. Now in Reliant entities, what I could go ahead and do is, in this case, it's for Acme inclusive. I also have one more, which is for EU VPN. So when I say it's for EU VPN, it's for the entire Europe region. And what I have done is I've added all my VPN for all the countries over there as Reliant entities. So France, Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands, all these are added as Reliant entities. How do we add that? You just go to add button and you can say, hey, even the entity which I'm listing over here, let's say in this case, I'm saying account application. Just an example, I want to add it. It's just as simple as that. It will give you a confirmation it's added and you can see it's now Reliant. Instead of adding them manually, we talked about adding them all together, which is via entity types. So in entity types, I may go and say that, hey, I have a list of departments. I just want to go ahead and add all of them as well. So it will automatically update my Reliant entities accordingly. So if you see, my Reliant entities are now 12 because it added a bunch of them from department as the entity type. You can also see if this was added from entity type, which entity type. So it helps you manage your Reliant entities effectively. And we can also see the compliance score for all of them. So that's the basic of converting something into from a standard control to the common control. So here, if you see, I can again go ahead and convert this to standard as well. So there are only two states where we support conversion. The first state is draft and the second state is attest. Only in these two states would you be able to do it, because the further states like review, monitor, these are the ones where it's actually live. So we don't want you to convert it. If you have to convert, you move it to one of these states and then you convert it and then you can go along with it. So I remember there was a question. Yeah,
so the question. So a Reliant entity is basically an entity that is capable of taking a common control. Do I understand that right?
Of taking a common control, or rather any entity which says I'm consuming from the common control, I can become a Reliant entity. Okay. So if I associate myself to a common control as consuming the common control, I am the Reliant entity. But I'm still my entity on my own as well. So for example, let me just go and show this.
And I can still have standard controls associated with that entity.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So I can be a Reliant entity and I can inherit the control testing and other results from a common control, but I can also have standard controls associated with that.
That is correct. So in this case, if you saw, if we see the monitor employee internet, I do have Reliant entities as France, but when I go to France, I still can go ahead and have my own controls, which are standard controls and not the common one. So in this case, I still see that there is a standard control already in place, and I may still go ahead and add standard controls as well. but I also am reliant to something else. Now, how do you differ between them? Because that's a really good question. How do I differentiate if I'm reliant to something versus I'm directly implementing it? So we had the downstream controls, which was a related tab existing on an entity, which continues to show everything that you are implementing. But if you are just reliant on something, you would see it under downstream inherited control. So in this case, this is a new tab that we've developed in the current release. And in this tab is where we see monitor employee usage, because it is being implemented by the entity EU VPN, but I myself, France VPN as an entity, am reliant on it. So I see myself as reliant here. So that's again a new tab that we have added over here. I also recall, Teresa, you had one more question from the common control that, hey, I have a bunch of controls. How do I turn them directly to Reliant? So if you already have a bunch of controls which are their existing control, under Reliant Entities, this is the path for going ahead and migrating, because once you take it new, you could have so many repetitive controls, you want to make it Reliant. So you just go ahead and select add from existing control. Now, what would happen is any controls that are part of the same control objective would be listed here. So I see monitor employee usage as 2 with 2 different entities. So I may go ahead and choose them all, or I may choose just one of them, and I may say that I want to add it. It will validate once and it will confirm that yes, the selected entity can be added. And then I say continue to add, which will automatically add it. So if you have, let's say 30, 40 controls, a sea of controls, which are already there, repetitive, you just come to add from existing control and you take it all from there, select all and move it here. So that's one way to do it.
So I think we're hitting a lot of the questions we have out here. Just to kind of reiterate, sure. I can have an entity, it can be associated with 2 common controls, right? The Reliant entity can have 2 common controls and additional standard controls. And then I can use my control, I can map common controls associated with a control objective also. By mapping a control objective, I can get all my controls added also. Yeah.
Yes. Under the control objective, also you could have your controls added. That would, when you go ahead and link your control objective and entity type or entities, that will create a standard control always. So via automation, it's always creating a standard, but you can convert the standard to a common, and in common, you can also have Reliant entities, as you mentioned.
So what if I have a Reliant entity of a control and I also have to implement remaining actions related to that standard control?
So you have a Reliant entity on a common control. Okay.
But this is a control, but maybe it's a common control. But I also want to implement remaining actions related to that standard control. So I guess maybe it's a standard control. So basically, if I have a Reliant entity of a control, so I have a common control, but I also have a standard control, I can implement remaining actions related to that standard control also. So really what we're saying is you can mix and match. You can do everything that you used to do before, only you can now do it whether it's a common control or a standard control. Basically.
Correct. And default, it will always be a standard control. You can continue to be reliant on something. You can still have your other standard controls as well and do the regular tasks and activities that you have on it. It will continue to go with it. That is correct.
So
I'll also showcase the 360 view. I think I also see that as one of the...
That is one. I think people are still a little bit confused about the common controls. So if you're still confused about common controls, please, put a question in there.
Sure. And there's much more to cover as well. So in the meantime, while you post
we can keep going, and I'll see if I can weed some of these things out and put them together to ask as a group. Sure.
So in 360 view, what we've done is on the control, if I'm already on the control, all I could see is I can see what all are my Reliant entities on the common control. So that's again a new tab in my 360 view. For those of our customers who've not used the workspace, 360 view gives you a list of everything together. It's a single pane view where you could go and scroll on from different things. So in this case, my control is monitor employee usage. And I have Reliant entities on it, which are 13, so I could still see them. I also have Reliant entity types. So from here, Again, if I go ahead and go to my other entity, which is France VPN, I would see that, hey, it has a standard control, which is one, and it also has one inherited control where I'm reliant to. So I have two different controls where one is my standard control for output device, and second is my inherited control of the monitor employee internet usage. So I can still do both of these things over here as well. Coming back to my compliance workspace where I am on right now, what we also have is you can also link your risk to the same control, which is a common control. So now if I go ahead and again go back to my entity where let's say I have 4 risks. So let me go to one of them. I would say data access, for example, which is a risk on my entity. I may say that, hey, this risk is being mitigated by my control, which is a common control. So I may come to controls and it gives me an option of inheriting my common controls. So because my entity France VPN already has a common control linked to it, I would see this button over here. When I go ahead and select it, it would allow me to select my control, which is a common control. So that common control, the single common control, is mitigating my risk, this is data access. Similarly, if I have any other risk on some other examples or entities, I may also go ahead from that risk view and I may say, hey, I'm inheriting it from the common control, and this is the common control that is mitigating my risk, which is there. One more thing to look at is when we are on the entity view. So in this entity view where you are, we've added one more table. So you had a chart which was controls, which shows you about active and non-compliant. Similarly, for inherited controls also, it will show you how many inherited controls you have and what is the compliance status of it. So that's a new widget that we've added. We've added the new downstream inherited controls as a related list. To understand this list better, we will also be looking at another entity because that is ECME where I would go to. So let me jump over to another entity, which is ECME in a minute. In the meantime, if there are any questions, Teresa, feel free to let me know. So I am on Acme as one of my entity, and I see, hey, there are a bunch of hierarchy of it, and I have so many downstream entities, and again, they may have so many inherited controls. So over here, what I'm saying is I have 23 downstream inherited controls. Now, these are not just my control, which means it's not just inherited by me, but also by the children of Acme. So if you look at the right, all of these are children, and then they also further have grandchildren and so on. So we have it at different levels. At any of these levels, if I'm inheriting something from a common control, it would come up in my downstream inherited list. So if I want to go ahead and see it in a better way, what I would do is I'll say show directly related inherited control, which means it will only show you the controls which are inherited directly by Acme. So in this case, I can see fire detection is being inherited by Acme as a common control, but this control is being actually implemented by my entity, which is Acme America. So that's the major difference. The entity on common control is the one which is the primary entity, how we call it as, or the one which is implementing it, the one which will be testing it. But Acme Inclusive is the reliant on it. So I see it in this fashion. Similarly, if I go ahead and go back to show all, what it would show is it will show all my children entity. So EU VPN, if you see here, EU VPN is one of my child of Acme on my right, and hence I see that EU VPN is also inheriting a control, and that is by Reliant Entity as sales. So sales is also one of my child. So these are all my children entities along with the common control and its actual implementer. So you have downstream inherited controls, and you continue to get your downstream controls, which are directly implemented by you. Again, in downstream controls, you may have something which is common. So you may go ahead and filter out. So if you see for Acme, I have so many of them which are common controls. Now, these are not just implemented by me, but also by my children. So if I want to see that, hey, in Acme, what all is directly implemented by me, I may say show directly related. When I do that, it shows me all my controls which I am implementing directly. It's a mix of standard and common control, but this is an existing feature. I'm sure many of the users are already known to this, but I just wanted to iterate because it becomes easy to bifurcate between common controls and standard controls once you have it, because this will be used for reporting by many organizations. So that's much of it for the common controls that we had. I'll pause again for questions before
We
jumping
do
into
have
the
lots of questions.
super. That's exciting because that means we are involved.
It's actually really good.
Yep.
So I'm just gonna read it off to you here. What
Yep.
if I am a reliant entity of a common control,
Mhm.
and I have a responsibility to implement the remaining requirement of the same common control?
Oh, now that becomes a shared control or much of a hybrid control is what we call
Yes.
it. That's a different concept altogether. We are working on that in future enhancement. That is not something that is implemented today. So we're taking it step by step. We only had standard controls till today. What we've done is common controls right now. And the next step that we are looking forward for in future would be the hybrid control, where it is shared among the responsibility of implementing is shared among multiple entities and everyone would contribute to it. So we call it as hybrid control, and that is something that's a feature which will be coming in next future releases.
Is there a way to denote the requirements for an entity to be a reliant entity of a control?
So we can, it's all depending from business to business, organization to organization. We're not limiting anything over here, but the compliance manager who's managing the control can go ahead and take their call on which entities to be added. We do have certain system restrictions in place. So for example, when users would try to add a Reliant entity, it would only go ahead and allow you to add entities, first of all, which has to be active. Again, those entities which are already a standard entity with the same name under the same objective, we don't allow that to be added because then it will be duplicate. I cannot be the entity relying on a common control, plus also having the standard control with the same name, exactly the same name. Because if I'm saying that, hey, for the fire sprinkler system, I'm relying on control on entity A. And then on the other hand, I'm saying that, hey, I'm also implementing it myself. That cannot be true practically. So we are avoiding such mistakes by system. So system will stop you and give you error message in such scenario. Also, if you are already relying on something else as a control A, you cannot rely on control B if the names are similar, just for the same reason. I can be part of one of them. I cannot be part of both. Otherwise, my score will be overlapped and duplicated. So we are avoiding that such kind of things from system itself, and system will prompt you in such cases.
Good, saving us from ourselves. So by default, controls are still standard, right? You have to make them compliant. And then
you have to
common, yes.
Yeah.
I'm reading and thinking at the same time. Then the next question here, the exempt column here. What is this? What does this apply to?
Oh, so this exempt column has been since before for the control, if you want to exempt the control from certain things, scoring and things like that. But that exempt column has nothing to do with the common control feature that we have today. It's just with the general controls feature, which was existingly there.
Yes. Okay. So here's another one that's a little bit, I'm going to try to read it so it makes sense. So if we would like to see the compliance posture in relation to a data retention for the company, would that allow one parent for general data retention and one specific to GDPR? Could you have those two? And could we, under these, have child controls based on different evidence? As an example, a Unix team would not be able to provide the same evidence as a Windows or Wintel team.
So I'll split the question into two parts. The
Yes.
first part which you had was, can I have two different controls with same name, but both of them can be common? Yes, that is a possibility. So you have two different controls with exactly the same name. So one is for SOX requirement, second is for GDPR, for example, and they are under the same objective. The only thing is the implementing entity, which is the entity which we see. So let me go back to my common control screen. So if I come here, the entity over here, which is there, that has to be different. You can have two common controls under the same objective with same name, but the entity which you have has to be different because it's being implemented twice by two different entities. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part was, could we under these have child controls? So control hierarchy was already in place. So in common controls, we are not touching that piece at all. So
And they can have evidence, and the evidence can be collected based upon those different child controls for the different teams.
maybe they are meaning the Reliant entities and they collected for each of these entities because we are already at a control level. And at that level, you have different entities. But yes, you can take evidence from these entities if they want to, if the user wants to just reiterate that question better for the second part, it would be helpful.
So I know we got to get on the issues, but I have a couple more questions. One, hopefully we can answer quickly. This is a new user to ServiceNow. Is there a way to show the CIs, the configuration items that the control is reliant on? We can literally, this is the power of the platform. We can literally go from the service to the process to the asset level. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to show that or if we just, this is another webinar that we can do. But yes, you absolutely can do that.
Correct. Just a high level answer to that is for each entity, you map it to your CI, which is already there. So if I open the EU VPN entity and if I go to details for the CI, what I would do is I'll say it refers to existing record and then I'll look it up over here and link it to it. Once you have the CI, because in GRC world, everything works on entity. So even the CIs become entity. Actually, had it been a CI, it would have been an entity with the tagging. And then, yes, you could walk to the CI and pull up the report. So you get a list of all these CIs, correct?
Okay. We've got a question about risk. Is there a roll-up on common controls to see all risks or entities mapped under that? Rolling it up to a control objective, citation, authority document.
Correct. So the control roll-up still continue, not the risk score, but the control compliance roll-up, right? That still continues to work the same. So if you had a control level, control objective level, the roll-up still continues to work the same. The only consideration is the common control related to the entity will also add as a factor to it. Like what we saw with weighted and without weighted, it will add as a factor to it, but it will continue to work the way it is.
And then as far as advanced risk assessments, it really doesn't impact advanced risk assessments, does it?
That is correct. The only thing is you can have mitigating for the risk, you can have a mitigating control to it, which will help you. But in advanced risk assessment, you still continue to do the assessments, which will give you your inherent and residual score and things like that. So that continues to work the way it is.
And then we have a follow-up to the question previously about the evidence collection. Controls today can be sent to many, but only where the evidence requirements are the same. She would like to be able to aggregate up based on the control objective, but where different teams provide different evidence files meeting the objective. And if this is something you guys want to talk about later to kind of dive into a little bit more to get more details on it, I'm sure that we can do that.
Yes, we take it offline, but just at a high level. Also, what I would like to inform is for the same control, you can still have it attested and the attestation process still works the same. So I may go ahead and say it's CRC attestation. I may go ahead and give attestation respondents over here for the control, even for the common control, I mean to say. And once it is attested, it goes on further for the compliance status, yes, no. But for the evidence requirements, yes, we could take it offline and we could discuss more.
Yeah, I think that would be a great enhancement.
Sure.
I'll let you switch over to the issue stuff, but while you're doing that, I'm going to ask you a question. So on the store, if someone actually wants to be able to start using these things, It's not the policy. They don't import policy and compliance. Are they updating? Is it Common Core plugin? What's the plugin they have to make sure they update?
Yes, so they will have the two plugins. The one is the policy and compliance and the profiles plugin, both of them. It's because issues code is lying in the profiles plugin, whereas the policy and compliance has the common controls thing. So they will have to install both of them. Yes.
Okay.
Also, all the details of how to do it step by step is all already out on our website for documentation. So yeah, they can also find it support docs. We
Awesome.
will also be sharing a KB article. So if you have more questions in regards to how do you go ahead and do the weighted score, because weighted score by default is not enabled. You need to go to a property and you need to go ahead and enable it for common controls. So that is why a property under policy and compliance where you have administration, you would see it there. Let me quickly show that as well before we jump into the issues thing. So if you feel that, hey, weighted score works good for me, what you would do is you would just go to properties. In this case, I've already activated under policy and compliance. You have the properties, excuse me. And under the properties is where you could go ahead and define that. Do you want to go ahead and second, this one. I'll just have to refresh my instance once. But basically in the properties is where you would have it. I will also I'll also share a KB article at the end. Along with this, we would post it, which walks you through the entire process. You could also select the states specifically where you want the score to be considered. So only if active, then they are considered. So what are active, you could again go ahead and define it there as well. So all of that is configurable for scoring as well. And
fantastic. I put the in the chat, I put the list, the URL to the registration page to register for more of these webinars. Also the playlist so you can watch other ones on demand. But here we are with our issues.
Super. So with issues also, we were getting that, hey, we have issues explosion. There's so many issues we have to manually manage because one issue can only be linked to either one control or either one risk. And even in that case, because issue is common across risk and the control that you have, because both are mitigating each other, then that issue should be allowed to be linked to each other. Similarly, issue cannot be linked to multiple other objects if it's the same issue. If I want to link it to 3-4 controls or 5 or different risks or mix of risk and controls or risk events. So that was all not available. That's where the architecture changes is what we've done entirely from the technical model. Now, what we are saying in here is we've revamped the issues already, where now everything that you had previously as a reference field, which was single select, is now converted into a multi-select via related list. So in issues, all the objects that you are able to relate as a reference field earlier, which was only one, now you could do multiple. So the key feature basically is you can relate the issues to multiple risk, control, events, any transaction records, entities, it may be audits, evidences. So you could go ahead and link it to multiple objects. This will significantly reduce the number of issues just because it was one-on-one. You had so many of the issues and again, managing the issue entirely from its life cycle. Again, this is available to all our customers. And for this, you need to install the GRC profiles. Again, this is only available in the workspace experience. So if you have the new UI experience, that's where you would see the multiple linking. If you're still using the old one, you continue to use as is, but you won't get the features of linking it to multiple ones. So just one thing to note. So I'm just having a before and after slide. So in before, you had individual issue per object in this way, issue 1, 2, 3. And after, you could say, hey, the single issue relates to all these things that I have in my GRC system. Let's look at a quick example. I'm saying that there's a risk of unauthorized access and there's a control for access control mechanism already in place. If while testing the control, the test failed, and that led to an issue. Now I can link it to my entity, my control, as well as risk. Earlier, I would have created 2 or more issues in this case, but now it works only with 1. Similarly, a very common example in case of patching of systems. If I've missed a patch, it would lead to so many multiple risks which are there due to the single patch. And now, instead of having 6 different issues, I can have 1 single issue managing by relating it to all 6 of them. So that's majorly the change that we've done. I'll jump in directly to the demo for this as well. So I can go again back to my compliance workspace as an example in this case. Yeah, I think it was the impersonation. Let me end it and I'll do it again.
I think the big driver for this particular release really was simplifying a lot of the manual or repetitive actions that people had to do. The ability to inherit the testing from the controls, the ability to relate issues to multiple elements it really simplifies, and also it actually provides, from an issue standpoint, a holistic view of where the problem is, what it relates to. It's kind of like a 360-degree view where you can actually see that this one issue relates to all these different things in one place. Which really it makes the ability to visualize where the issues are, where the problems are, what you need to work on first, prioritize, I think is huge. Would it create duplicate issues between the 2 generated automatically? Let's see, would it create duplicate issues between the ones generated automatically one's a control indicator or fails? Okay, so would it generate duplicate issues if a control fails, an indicator fails, multiple things fail? Would you get multiple issues? The answer is no. But maybe you can show how that works.
Yes. So one thing that we've done is exactly how you are explaining it, that now you could have a 360 view of the same issue. So I have this SAP Financial Accounting has a control test failure, which was my application. So I may link it to already a single control over here, which it's already linked to. Or I may say that, hey, you know what, this also applies to a set of entities. This is just my demo data. It's not relatable, but I just want to show the power of what we've done. So once I go ahead and say, hey, it applies to all 3, they also have their individual entities, it also automatically updates the related entities for it. So if you see earlier, there were 2 entities, and now for addition of 3 more, we can also see those 3 entities automatically linked. Similarly, now for the same issue, you may also go to risk, and let's say it was due to a vulnerability and the patch fix was an example. You may say that loss of availability is for all of these entities, and earlier you had to have individual issues for each of them as well. So now you can actually go and relate to them. Not just for this, you can even have engagements. You can even link it to multiple risk statements. So risk statements, again, is the other thing which gets auto-populated if you have it different. In this case, it was loss of availability for all my risk. So it's still 1. But had I gone and let me try to add another risk, so it also updates the relevant risk statements for me. So if I say loss of confidentiality, for example, it would update my risk statement also to reflect the same. Similarly, when I add controls, so I see now it's 2 risk statements that I see, loss of availability and confidentiality. Similarly, for controls, when I go ahead and add certain things, my control objectives also gets updated had it been part of different control objectives that I had. We can also go ahead and link it to multiple policies or risk events or processing activity. Processing activity, just for those who don't know, we also have a new app for privacy, and that's where it comes from. So you could also link it to those processing activities, and the issue is linked to all of them. What
about citations?
Oh, yes, we'll come to that as well.
Okay.
So coming to the 360 view is where you could see that, okay, now my issue is related to all these multiple objects. I can deep dive into one of them. I can also see it by different ways and graphical. I can further go down to that entity and I can see what other issues, if there are any, which are there. And with the integration of common controls, we can even see the standard and inherited controls just as a refresher for it. So coming back to my issue which I had, I recall one thing which someone had asked was about, you have indicators which are in place. Would they continue to create individual issues? That is a yes for now. So meaning if you had 3 different indicators on 3 different controls and they were failing, it will continue to go ahead and create 3 different issues. But you can go ahead and manually update it now, because we don't know which indicator is, because indicator is a manual setup, automated indicators or manual. It's all done by company to company based on their requirements. So we don't know when you want to go ahead and mix it. But yes, that's again one of the things that you would have to take care of. One more thing that we've done with the issues is for administrators. This is so in GRC administration, we have added issue relationship configuration. Now, what this does is, as you saw, that whenever I'm adding a risk, the risk statement gets auto-populated. Similarly, whenever I add a risk, the entity gets auto-populated. That is driven by entries in this configuration. So in here, I go ahead and configure it that what is my relationship between issue to item. Item in this case is my risk or control, and what should it update? So I'm saying it should update my entity. That's one entry. My second entry talks about content, which is again about my risk statement or entity or the control objective. And my third entry is about processing activity. So from privacy, if I have a processing activity, it will also update my relevant entity. All these 3 configurations are also shipped out of the box. So customers have it ready to use. They are free to go ahead and add more relationships here. And again, there's a detailed documentation about how do you use this and how your admins can leverage it. So if you want to go ahead and merge certain things or add when certain things are added, you may as well go ahead and link this to. I will jump back for a minute and try to go back to properties. I saw that I was logged in as a user rather than admin, and hence it wasn't showing me the right things. So if I come back to properties under my policy and compliance, that's where we were talking about the scoring. And here are all of these states which are considered for scoring. So these are different active states. If I remove something from here, let's say if I only keep monitor, so only monitor controls will be used for scoring or not. I also have a property here which says use weighted average control. So if I make it yes, it will take the weighted average score, or else it will continue to take the regular score. So just wanted to show it before we jump on to other. That's majorly it for how we have it issues. If someone hasn't seen, I also want to take this chance to showcase the issue overview page. Because with the issues, we also had an issue overview page already existing. But when you link the issue to multiple things, you also see this dashboard now, which will show you issue by state, issue type, rating. You can go ahead and change it. So it's a visualization. You can track your tasks and exceptions for over here. And that's how this is already out of box. You can filter it by entity and you can see certain things for that. So even after the issue architecture changes, this issue landing page continues to work the way it was supposed to work. And even this is widely used for issues.
So we've got a couple questions in the last 5 minutes or so. This is really to be able to take other elements and relate it to an issue. You can't really map multiple issues together.
Mapping multiple
right?
issues together, if you already have, let's say, 10 different issues which are already there, now you cannot combine them or merge them into one as of today, but that is something we could look at in future. But today what we're saying is you remove all the other ones, you keep one issue and link it to all the 10 different objects from where it were created.
And if you had a bunch of issues related together, if you related them to an object, it would relate all those issues to that one object then also.
Correct.
And so that's one question. So the other question then is, in the issue, we saw the 360-degree view, we saw risks, we saw controls. If we added another control and related it to that issue, and clearly there was an issue. So the controls that are related to that issue right now are non-compliant. If we related another control to that issue, would it automatically mark that control as non-compliant?
No. So it works the other way around. Whenever the control is non-compliant, it creates an issue. Now, if you link the same issue and go ahead and tag it to another control, you are saying that because this issue is open on that control, it should mark it as compliant. So the control status basically works on based on the attestation that is being done and the review of that control. So linking it is just an alternative or an option to go ahead and work with the issue to have it linked to multiple objects. The automation of it, that still works the way it was working. So there's no change over there.
Perfect. We don't have any more questions in the queue right now, but if you do have one, please feel free to ask it.
Yep. We still have 3 minutes. So if we want to see, I will also showcase as to how the controls. Let me take one common control. We spoke about monitoring EU VPN as an example. Sorry, this one. Let me take the other one. So I just want to showcase that here, if you see all my Reliant entities are there, which are added by different ways. I can also go ahead and remove my Reliant entity type, which will only remove the Reliant entities from this. So in case, let's say a department moved away from a particular location or to a different location, you may go ahead and remove that entity type and it would go ahead and update your Reliant entities and automatically remove that. So it works both ways for adding and removing. As well, what I wanted to talk about is if you see the compliance score over here, it's also by default 0. In this case, it's 0 because there are no other controls on this and the current control is non-compliant. If I go ahead and make this control as compliant, it will also affect my compliance score over here. So all I have to do is go to Able Tutor because that's the one who is being given the attestation and take the attestation and mark it as compliant. So even that works and that's already taken care about. So the scoring gets calculated accordingly.
So we got a couple questions. We're going to follow up with those questions later on. I'm going to have to stop the recording and move on. But I wanted to thank you so very much for everything. Let me just actually, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. There we go. Sure. There's a way for you to connect with us. We really appreciate your time. Rob, thank you so very much for your demo skills. Everyone was raving about them on chat. Check out our website, connect with us on the community. You can use these QR codes to be able to get the playlist. It's also in the chat along with the registration for the webinars. And again, thank you very, very much for your time. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.